afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's meeting of the Highways and Transport Overview and Scrutiny Committee, which is taking place at County Hall in Glenfield. This meeting will be broadcast live via the County Council's website and will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Can everyone please switch their microphones on when speaking and turn it off when finished speaking. I've got no apologies. Any apologies? No, I don't think. Keith just left the meeting somewhere. I'd also like to welcome Maggie Wright and Ozzy O'Shea, the portfolio holder, who's joining us online this afternoon. So item 1, minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of September 23. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 7th of September 23 are taken and confirmed and signed. Agreed? Thank you. Question time. I've not received any questions from the public. The 3 questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I've not received any questions from members. Item 4, there are no urgent items. Item 5, declarations of interest in respect of items on the agenda. Do members have any declarations they wish to make? Flying along, item 6, declarations of party whip in accordance with Overview and Scrutiny Procedure Rule 16. Are there any declarations of the party whip? No. David? No. Thank you. Item 7, no petitions have been received. So the first substantive item on the agenda today is the Leicestershire Local Flood Risk Management Strategy, public consultation, outcomes and publication. They're on page 15 of the agenda. I'm going to invite Janet Walker, Assistant Director, to present the report. Janet.
Thank you, Chair. I think we'll all agree that this is quite a timely sort of time of the situation we've just had with Storm Babette to be reviewing this proposal and proposed draft strategy for us. So the item on the agenda today is to provide an overview of the findings of the public consultation on the draft and updated Leicestershire Local Flood Risk Management Strategy. I won't say it in full from now on, I'll refer to it as the strategy if that's okay, Chair. And to let the committee know about the responses we received to the consultation, which you were part of, and then also seek your comments on the final version that is due to be presented to Cabinet for adoption. So you'll be familiar, we've been developing the strategy for a while now. We have
Not like you, Jenna.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, back online. Sorry about that. Just in terms of a quick reminder of why the strategy is being updated, we had to have a look at the timescales that we were working to. We're due to update the strategy every 6 years. And I think, again, it does align well, the strategy update aligns well with other timetables, other documents being produced, particularly by the Environment Agency. We've got to be consistent with national strategy, and you can imagine over the period of 6 years plus that has changed, and we're bringing the document up to date with that, particularly to be consistent with the National Flood and Coastal Erosion Risk Management Strategy, which was updated in 2020. And I think importantly as well, at a local level, there was a recommendation of Environment, Transport, Overview and Scrutiny Committee, as it was at the time, to review the strategy and also the work we do following significant flooding in 2019. And so this strategy represents the culmination of a lot of that work. Again, I've mentioned before that we've got an established team here at the council. We're lucky to have built that. It's a difficult area to recruit and resource. And one of the things we wanted to do is build on that improved understanding we have of the local area and the flood risk in Leicestershire by incorporating that into the strategy. We wanted to reflect the importance of community engagement and that it could, we feel the strategy and the work that will flow from it provides a useful tool for community engagement. And I think, again, we've had some changes in approach since the last strategy was published, just through learning about the ways of working since we've been the lead local flood authority. We've reflected those in the strategy document as well. So we brought this strategy to you in draft in June. We set out some of the key differences between the previous strategy version and this one. We've tried to restructure. We've tried to reflect the principles and objectives. We've tried to be clear about roles and responsibilities. I'm sure a lot of you will agree, if you've looked into this area, that the roles and responsibilities are particularly complex and are difficult, I think, for members of the public particularly to understand who does what. We've tried to set that out within the document. And with all of that in mind, we went out to public consultation over the summer. We've also held focus groups. We have also taken legal advice. We've engaged with our partners, tried to work in a collaborative way to produce this strategy. So taking all that on board, we went out, and with the processes set out in paragraphs 16 to 22, I won't go through them in detail, Chair, but the way in which we consulted is set out there. And similarly, sort of following on in the following paragraphs, then the response to those consultations was set out. We had a good engagement through the consultation process. I think between getting our message out there, Leicestershire Matters, other items, people have engaged well, and as well because during the time of the consultation, people were affected by flood events. So following that consultation, then we've as much as we can address those issues that were raised. There was a lot of support and positive comments around the strategy as well, but we've taken on board that feedback and incorporated it into the draft version that is now attached for you at Appendix B. So you'll see from that strategy that we've tried to simplify the document. We've used a lot of appendices then to keep more technical information in there, and you'll see. Again, I'm not going to read through all the appendices for you, but there are a number of appendices attached to the report. People can review those in order to see some more of the detailed feedback. So and then if you look in the report, some of the comments received are set out through paragraphs. Where do we start? Sorry. 31 through to 39, and there's some reflection in there of what people found were most important, and clearly working with communities and collaboration were really important to people, and we've tried to reflect this in the strategy document. So then we've also tried to clarify, I've mentioned specific communities, I've also mentioned roles and responsibilities, but we've also tried to clarify the risk-based approach principle that's throughout and underpins our strategy document. And therefore we've introduced a more clarified definition of that. So having taken on board all of that feedback, we've revisited the strategy as it was draft, now proposed to go to Cabinet, and we're seeking your views as the committee on that in order to present to Cabinet, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Jenna. Now it's time for members to comment and ask questions, and I'm sure Jenna will do her best to answer. Mr. Bill.
Chairman, well, first of all, could I congratulate the officers on producing such a comprehensive and thorough report. I think this is going to be a very valuable document that we can all refer to at a later date when the need arises. Could I just ask one question, and that is, what we've noticed, of course, is that although Leicestershire doesn't have the extreme flooding that they suffer from in other parts of the country, you know, by and large, has consideration been given to the impact of all the additional development that's coming our way across the county in terms of the effect it will have on land drainage, associated problems?
Yeah, I think we touched on that this morning. Jana, would you like to answer that, and probably bring in Lee, who's joined us online?
Yeah, Lee, sorry, my colleague Lee Quincy, Head of Services, is available online if we need to call on him as well. I think in general, there's sort of two levels, isn't there, in terms of that development. There's the strategic level across the whole of Leicestershire, and there's the local level at a planning application stage. So since the establishment of the Lead Local Flood Authority and our role in that, we are a consultee in the process, and therefore are able to comment on the impacts of development through that process. In terms of an overall strategic approach and assessment, I think that work being done through local plans or indeed the strategic growth plan, we do in collaboration with the local planning authorities. It's effectively a constraint on development, isn't it? And I think more and more information is available now to assess that. I think I wouldn't be able to comment in terms of the capacity for other organisations or roles and responsibilities around that, but they're the processes by which they are considered.
Thank you, Jenna. Les.
Thank you, Chair. It's really just an opportune moment. My laptop's running out of puff again, which is weird. So was fully charged. I think it's just an opportune moment to just actually comment on and commend the officers. There is a flooding issue in my division, and I have to say, whether it's the flood authority, whether it's the highways engineers, whether it's the resilience forum, the response and support's actually been good, really, really good. You know, we've got an idea what the engineering solution's been like, but actually, I think the point is about response and recovery. If there is an issue, it's how that issue is managed, how we're working with residents, and in this particular case, the parish council, and actually build it and communicating with the residents who are affected. So I just think it's an opportune moment to say, actually, the officers do a cracking job behind the scenes when things happen. So, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Les. Mr. Merrick.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a great report, and I like the bit about working in partnership with communities and all the rest of it. There's a point in number 2, working with communities, where it says you can report block gullies to the Highway Authority. And my question is, I reported some block gullies in Hubblescote last week when we had all the heavy rain, River Sense, and they sent a reply back saying they were cleaned in February and they're not due to be cleaned again until December. So I just want to know if you've really joined up all the loops in that process, because if something's in a flood risk area, you can't wait for the next scheduled clean if it's already flooded before you go and clear the gullies. And nobody came to clear the gullies. And the water drained away eventually, but it took a long time.
Yeah, I was going to say, between myself and Pat, we can pick this up. I think that we need to look into the detail. That one clearly take your concern away. But in terms of ways in which we could mitigate known risk, that's the kind of intelligence we want to be using. I'll just pass over to Pat in case there's anything you want to add. But I think certainly we understand the principle of what you're saying and need to look into that incident.
So my follow-up question is, if somebody reports a gully and it's in an area of flood risk, then do the people manning the telephones know that that is an area of flood risk, so they can get the relevant people out to unblock the gullies to stop the flood from getting worse? That's what I want to know, really.
So thank you for your question, Councillor. The way the system works is every area of flood that's reported to us with highway flooding, we will look into it and investigate it and try to understand what the picture is. When the committee visited Croft earlier last month, we understood a little bit around what a gully does. And 9 times out of 10, the gully will be clean. But what you might find is that the area around it will affect that flood, and it may not be the gully that the problem is with. Yeah. But we should, and if you want me to pass on if you want to pass the details on to me, I will go and get that one
straight with you.
Particularly investigated.
Thank you. Well, yeah, good report, great report. Thank you.
Any other questions? Amanda. Sorry, Maggie.
Oh, sorry. Okay, thank you. No, I think it's just for me just to say congratulations to the team, because if members will recall, we started doing work on this as a member team and looking at the principles of it a long time ago. And we put, I think, 26 recommendations forward. I remember that because it was the same number as the alphabet. So, and those have been incorporated into this strategy. One thing I will say is that really there is a bit of a step change to make people and residents aware that be flood prepared, be flood ready, because there is an onus on residents to actually take responsibility and be prepared for what may be coming. Just because they haven't flooded in the past doesn't mean to say they will flood in the future, because there is a real change with how surface water flooding develops, etc. And we are developing, the team are looking at putting a website together where this information is key. So members of the public looking at that website are directed where to go and to know what their responsibilities are. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Maggie. Amanda?
Thank you, Chair. I think it's a really comprehensive document, and I do think it's quite an opportune time to have these conversations, particularly as we've had quite a long period of pretty bad weather, not just through the last few weeks, but actually the summer's been pretty wet as well. So the ground's already drenched through. We've seen case studies within the documents that have been used that are flooding again in this time round. So yeah, I suppose it would be really useful for us as councillors to sort of go back to our residents to say, this is because of the weather, but what are we doing in the background? So the last few weeks, I'm assuming we'll have had flood events that we're going to do some assessment work on that we'll need to get back around the process. So it'd be really useful for us to understand. And so what happens when, in real terms, the strategy is great. I think it'd be useful to understand what happens in the real world when we have a flood event, and we've had a number of them. And just following on from Councillor Bill's question from earlier, is just we as councillors, we get quite a bit when there's residential development, but not quite as much information when there's commercial development. And commercial development, if I look at the commercial development, it's tend to be concrete, lots of lots of car parking, whatever is what work do we do differently, or should we do differently when commercial developments come forward, because of the way in which they do, the land is just dealt with differently. With houses, at least as gardens, there's more sort of green space that's built into it. How do we look at it differently if it's commercial? Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Jenny, are you able to answer that?
Yeah, just briefly on the first point, I think you're absolutely right. No point in having a strategy if we're not doing anything with it. So as an example, we had a number of properties flooded in Leicestershire in the recent events. They will all be investigated. Obviously, that takes time. All of the ones that, where we're meeting the criteria set out will be investigated, and that obviously takes time to get through. And as we've talked about, there's different sort of reasons that those flood events will occur, and it's really important that we get to the bottom and understand those. The outcome of that investigation then informs the solutions, and those reports are available online as they come out. So again, if people are obviously usually interested in a particular area, they'll be able to see that and look at that. And again, as part of what Mrs. Wright was saying, hopefully that information becomes easier for people to access through the website. So I think that'll be an important step forward as well. Just in terms of commercial development, I think you're right. I was talking about kind of our developing knowledge through having the role of lead local flood authority and our ability to input into the consultation process of plan applications. That applies for housing, residential developments and commercial developments alike. I think as we get better technologies, better understanding of how to mitigate flood risk, not just for your own property, but for the area around, we can incorporate those along with our partners who are also consultees in the process, depending on the type of development where it is. So I think it is equally important. I think you're right in that it's certainly sort of maybe more higher on the agenda of people's minds and conversation about that residential, and we need to make sure that we're engaging in that commercial consultation process in the same way, which hopefully we will be doing, working with our partners as well. Any learning that we can take and put into that, but we are where we are consulted, we can work on that as well.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. Mr. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Chairman. Excellent report. Thank you very much. The officers have obviously done a lot of work on this, and it's very comprehensive. I think it's timely to have a flood risk management strategy in place, not only building and construction work, but we see increasing number of weather situations with global warming. And I think to have that flood risk preparedness in place is a very good thing. I think it is everybody's responsibility to also have them eye on their own property and prepare for extreme weather conditions. So commend the officers on the report. In the Vale of Belvoir, I've got two particular villages, Long Clawson and Redmile, where they've got a culvert going under the village, and I've been working closely with Victoria Coombs and she's been very, very good and responsive in everything that I've been looking for. So just to mention her name and thanks for the work she's been doing on that. It's about just being prepared for these extreme weather conditions and storms that keep hitting us. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Lovegrove. Are we all through on questions, comments? Well, thank you for the positive comments and the excellent questions, and thank you, Jenna, for reporting, for presenting. Before I go on to the recommendations, we do have the portfolio holder, Mr. Ozzy O'Shea, online. Ozzy, I hope you're recovering after your recent operation, and I wish you a speedy return back to full, capacity, if you like. Ozzy, is there any comments you'd like to make before I move on?
I would just, I'd like to thank the officers for a very detailed and in-depth report. I don't know whether members realise, but we only have a very small team in the flood department, and they do an absolute excellent job. And Victoria, I can only speak very highly of as leading with Jamie on that team. But the team works so hard with such a small team. They've produced a fantastic report that you can all go through there and understand. So I'd just like to give my thanks to the team.
Thank you, Ozzy. I'm sure that will be passed on. Now, I'll move on to the recommendations. We are asked to note the report, and the committee's views are sought on the strategy. We will take the report as being duly noted and ask that the comments made by members today be reported to Cabinet. Agreed? Thank you very much. Thank you, Jenna.
Can I just ask, just purely for the record, there's been some very complimentary comments about the officers. Can they be recorded, please?
Well, I'm sure they are, and it's duly noted. Thank you. Item 9, we'll move on. We have a street lighting review and the proposed changes on page 301 and 322 of your agenda. Mr. Pat Clark, Assistant Director, is presenting the report. Pat.
Thank you, Chair. So the purpose of the report today is to advise the committee on the outcome of the street lighting public consultation and the proposed next steps for the street lighting review. We also seek views from the committee in shaping the future street lighting offer and seek approval to take it to Cabinet on in December 2023. Just to recap on the decisions from previously, our MTFS commitment has been identified of a saving for the street lighting service of £500,000 in financial year 26-27. A proposal has been tabled to dim all controllable streetlights across the county to 30% from 8 p.m. Currently, dimming takes place to 30% at 10 p.m. in most residential streets in Leicestershire. As well as the financial saving, the proposal also supports the commitment to net zero by 2030 and offers a carbon saving, CO2 saving of approximately 315 tonnes. So some background with regard to the design. So street lighting design is governed by relevant British standards, which is supported by a code of practice, well-maintained highway infrastructure to 2016. The key principle of the code is that highway authorities will develop their own levels for service based on a risk assessment. For street lighting, the code encourages the delivery of the right quality and amount of light in the right place at the right time. The option to dim to 30% intensity from 8 p.m. moves away from the compliance within the current British standards and is deemed to be a departure from standards and therefore would require or will require Cabinet's approval. Under the Highways Act 1980, there is no duty on an authority to provide streetlights, and it is in the authority's discretion. But where streetlights are provided and come under the ownership of the authority, it has a duty to maintain in a safe condition. Under the Crime and Disorder Act 1998, the authority has a duty to exercise its responsibility to do all that reasonably can to prevent crime and disorder in an area. The County Council maintains approximately 69,600 street lighting assets. The current street lighting strategy is split between residential routes and traffic routes, with different levels of lighting. All lights are currently dimmable to different levels depending on traffic flow and road category. Full details can be found in your pack on section 14. Since 2010, the Street Lighting Service has implemented a number of significant changes to the street lighting regime across the county. These measures have included turning off unnecessary lights, converting to LED, trimming the switch on and switch off of street lights, dimming street lights to certain levels depending on traffic flows through the hours of darkness. As a result, the energy consumed by the authority dropped circa 17 million kilowatt hours per year from that used in 2010. So very significant. The current proposals, as you'll be aware, the service have recently undertaken a public consultation to dim all the street lights to a 30% intensity from 8 p.m. The consultation ran from the 6th of July for 4 weeks, and the results have supported the service to further refinement of the proposed changes based on the risk that's outlined in the Code of Practice and in line with the Code of Practice. The feedback from the public consultation has been included in your pack between section 19 through to 26 and is also included in Appendix A. The main findings from the public consultation were a mixed view on the proposed changes to street lighting regimes. Just over half were not supportive of the proposed changes. Those not supported cited the perceived fear of crime and overall personal safety. Those in agreement with the proposed changes was all around the environment and the carbon agenda and moving forward. Feedback from key stakeholders, there was no objections from the emergency services, which included the police. We also consulted with Loughborough University, and we are still awaiting to receive formal feedback, but we have received verbal feedback. The Leicestershire Equalities Challenge Group had some observations, and we have worked through them with that team. Therefore, the service is proposing that from the work that's been undertaken to date and on the risk assessment and the consultation, current lighting levels are retained in the following areas. For vertical traffic calming features such as speed tables and bumps in the road. Zebra crossings to make sure that zebra crossings are illuminated correctly. And town centres. The town centres will need to be determined by some work that we will need to do with the council and the local area. And currently illuminated steps. The service will continue to work with the police on the specific highlighted areas from our resulting consultation. And the lighting levels may be adjusted if there is evidence of vehicle accidents between 8 p.m. and 10 p.m. or an increase in crime or antisocial behaviour between the same times. The service will also continue to review and monitor the increased interaction between pedestrians and street furniture, the increased conflicts between vehicles outside the conflict areas, and increased between vehicles, pedestrians and cyclists outside of conflict areas. The service is proposing to implement a pilot scheme of dimming across the county with the exceptions of what I've just highlighted. In addition, there may be further exemptions once work has been concluded with the police on specific areas raised as part of the consultation and as part of an ongoing process. The effect of these proposed exemptions will result in an estimated reduction of 120,000 to the anticipated savings and an approximately 53 tonnes of carbon dioxide. Therefore, the revised anticipated annual savings will be in the region of 380,000 and 261 tonnes of carbon. The results from the consultation indicated a perceived increase in crime. Perceived crime is very difficult and hard to measure, and therefore the service is proposing the 18-month trial, working with the police and the emergency services to try and understand the impact on the actual crime statistics. The risk assessment has been included in your pack and will be implemented, and the data will be reviewed periodically as part of the trial using the ongoing collection of data over the trial period. The County Council will work with the police and the emergency services to continue to work together on the pilot. Gateway review meetings will be set up every 3 months to review the ongoing progress, and a report will be submitted back to Cabinet at the end of the trial period to consider the results and whether the trial should be made permanent. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Pat. You're aware that I'm seek comments and questions from members, and you're quite happy to answer, so I'll take questions. Les?
Thank you, Chair. So I think I've got 2 or 3 bits. So I think observationally, I think the query question consideration around perceived crime is a really interesting one. And I say that simply because a few years ago I actually did some analysis in a different world on crime post lights out overnight, and actually the crime went down with that principle that burglars don't like dark because they're more visible. So I think it's going to be really interesting. I'm very encouraged that this is a pilot and those areas are going to be monitored. I have no particular view on 8 PM. I think it's suck it and see to some degree. And I always find it a bit amusing, I guess, that I for one go overseas for my main summer holidays, and streetlights are generally non-existent. So I do think there's some interesting dynamics. My question is to do with, have we explored the option of, rather than dimming, but turning every alternate light off? So there's still a prevailing light, but you're actually physically turning every alternate street light off. Okay, so that's the fundamental question. And I think in addition to that, Chair, I would like to see, and I accept that, there's a risk with, 50 odd members that officers spend a lot of time looking at things, is sometimes I think there is a need or a social responsibility in certain areas to turn the lights back on where they're on all night off. And that's generally where we're going to be having pockets of elderly people living, and they may feel isolated. And, I think the sort of no and here's the risk assessment probably needs to be looked at a bit differently. But that's a secondary issue to this. So my only question then fundamentally about the report is, have we considered turning every alternate street light off instead of dimming?
So we haven't, but what we are trying to do is look at, because it is governed by the code of practices that are out there, what we are trying to do is make sure that we're doing it in line with the code of practice. But it will depend on the lighting intensity in that area rather than every other light being switched off. But we can definitely look into that.
information I think would be worth looking at, just to see if we can, because that would actually save more.
Thank you for that. Amanda?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think the overriding concern I had is that there are two groups of individuals that have identified greater than the general population. There's obviously women of a certain age, which I have a conflict of interest. I'm banging that age, just so everyone's aware of that. But also there was a real sense from disabled people that they felt more uncomfortable with this proposal. So we do have two distinct groups that have felt more vulnerable, or felt there is that they get a greater vulnerability because of this. So we talked in the spokesman pre-meet just to have that. If I could have a look at the equalities impact assessment on it, I'd be really grateful. I suppose the question really is, what mitigation do we put in place? Because the reason that people will put forward that they're worried about lighting, and again, women of a certain age, I have teenage children, and they are more likely not to be in a car. They're more likely to be walking from place to place. 8 o'clock isn't that late for a 16-year-old to be walking back from the football, or be walking back from swimming, or doing more leisurely things. Is they're worried about safety of others, and there is that sense is. So how will we monitor that, and how will that the trial actually look at those vulnerable groups in more detail and make sure that they've been adequately consulted on the sort of post trial. The second thing is around the areas of vulnerability. So the Police and Crime Commissioner does have a map of Leicestershire where the public can put forward the areas that they feel most vulnerable. I'd be really interested to see what data has been mapped over the top of the information that's come through from the consultation, to make sure the areas that the Police and Crime Commissioner has identified as being areas where people have felt unsafe aren't excluded because they just haven't got involved in this consultation. We do have very few 700 responses. If the Police and Crime Commissioner responses are identified, I feel unsafe in this spot, I feel unsafe in this spot, that'd be really helpful. And the last question is what work is done with the other parts of highways, because tree lining does take away lighting, and certainly one of my divisional bugbears is the Lubbock Way, and I report every few months the trees need cut back. That is used in day all the way up through to the night by pedestrians and cyclists. That is always busy. What work do we do to make sure the light that we do have is as effective as possible? Thank you.
Thank you. So as you quite rightly said, we spoke about the equalities risk assessment earlier on today, or impact assessment, and we will get that circulated to you, and it will also be part of the cabinet pack as well. I think one of the reasons why we're doing the pilot and the trial is trying to get that feedback from vulnerable groups. And what I'd like to suggest that we do is to pick that up as a specific area that we will look at when people do come to us with regards to their concerns, and to monitor the feedback for them and monitor the amount of inquiries we get as far as that's concerned. Picking up on your question around the Police and Crime Commissioner's map, I think it'd be really good we'll look at doing a heat map against that and understand the implications of what we've picked up on our survey, and equally what's being picked up on the information that's available online. And the other side of that is to make sure that the police, when we do meet them, we constantly review that in conjunction with that. And on the last one, I will pick up that about the trees. Trees are, an area of great asset in Leicestershire, but they also have some challenges with them, and you're not always able to go out and cut trees when you need to cut trees. But I will pick up that if there is any particular ones that you want to tell me about.
Thank you, Pat. Mr. Bill.
People I see being around on the doorstep say, will you take that tree down, please? And you think, hang on, it's our policy to plant more trees. We're trying to save the planet. Oh yeah, that's all very well, but can you cut that tree down? So no, I do agree with all the comments have been made. So there's not much more to be. When I was a lot younger, living at home, I lived in a part of the country where there was no street lighting. It was great fun walking back at night.
I bet you've been scrumping as well, haven't you?
Yeah, and there was a cliff edge where I lived. But to come back at midnight with no lighting at all, that was how I was brought up. So street lighting is a bit of a luxury. But I mean, you know, the problem is you take these reports, and I do agree with all the with all the conclusions, but they are based on just that small number of people who responded. So when you go out asking people, well, what's wrong with this? What help do you want? Could you have the street lights put back on, please? They don't answer to the official consultation that we see here. They all want more street lighting, not less. And we try to say, well, actually, the county council is doing its best to stave off this 114 imposition and all its consequences. There really isn't any spare money around. Honestly, there isn't. Yeah, but all right, we've heard what you say, but can you get the lights? Can you get the light switch on? One idea that has been put to me is, could we have is it possible in certain places to have sensory lighting? Or is that completely out of the question, where the street...
I think you just mentioned we've not got the money.
No, but
So there's a cost to add in sensors on light.
Yeah, rather than switching them off. Is that out of the question, where you walk down a street and then the lights come on as you...
PIR, I think it refers to that. But
Does that make sense? I mean, we have them in our houses, don't we? Where we go into a room, and if the damn thing works, it comes on.
Again, David, I think in an ideal world with the county, a wash of money, that would be a consideration.
Would that save money, or is that just more expense, or is it not practical? It wouldn't work.
Sorry, it'd be more expense. That our technology that we've got out there could not cope with that at the moment.
Right. Okay. That's fair. Thank you, Jim.
Thank you for that, David. Who we got? Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. First of all, just to pick up on David's point with the light sensors, I'm sure some of the local youths on the bikes that have grand fun riding up and down, seeing the lights come up and down again. Indeed, yeah, Christmas trees, brilliant. Pat, just a quick question. Does this take into account developments in lighting technology? So, for example, we've gone from sodium to LED, and there's sort of developments in OLED. So we're kind of getting more light for less power, which seems to be sort of progressing more or less week by week. So does that offer us some additional opportunities? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Councillor. As I outlined in the report from 2010, significant investment has been put into the street lighting asset. But what you have seen is significant saving, and it really is. I mean, the street lighting asset that we've got here in Leicestershire is probably one of the better ones in the country. So it is really cutting edge. There's an awful lot of interest in what we do and how we do it. Certainly the teams are talking to other teams in the country with regards to the progressive nature of where we've got to with the street lighting in Leicestershire. So yes, I think the answer to your question is absolutely it does. But what we won't do is sit back on our laurels as far as technology is concerned.
Thank you for that, Pat. Mr. Lovegrove.
Thank you, Chairman. When you pay the bills, you watch the expense. I can remember my dad going around the house when I was younger, turning lights off from the rooms we weren't in. And now I find myself doing exactly the same thing with our house. But I endorse this initiative 100%. What's it? Necessity is the mother of invention. And because of the tightness of the belt of the county council funding, we're having to look at this. This would have been a good initiative had we had lots of money as well, because we're examining every position we're in. So 100% endorse this, and I hope it's a great success. a couple of points of clarification of how you ended up on a 30% light dimming. And then also seasonality. If the trial is over 18 months, that it depends when that starts. It might be on 2 winter periods in the summer period. In the summer, 8 till 10, there's hardly any. It's nearly light anyway. So we might need to make sure that doesn't skew the answers if we're looking at the crime figures and perception of crime in the summer months, because it's hardly dark at all. I think it's the winter months that are the main concern. So it's that trial period and how you ended up on that 30%. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, the 30% is the national standard that's out there in the British standard. So that's what we've been operating to. All we're doing is pushing the envelope on that to make that earlier. And picking up on the consultation period. So the trial should, as long as Cabinet approve it, will hopefully go into place in February. So it kind of spans 2 winters, is what it will do. But I think the key for us is really getting that knowledge around, well, has it had an impact or not? As one of the councillors previously has said here today, when we went to park night lighting, everybody thought that was going to have an impact on crime, and it actually went the opposite way. So it's good.
Okay, thank you. Pat, in your presentation, you mentioned all lights with exceptions. Now, I may have missed it in the report, or I may have missed your comment, but does that include road junctions where lights are normally kept on all night?
So we'll keep the lights on that are on at the moment, but they'll be slightly dimmer on road junctions, yes.
Okay, right. Well, thank you for your comments. Oh, Amanda, you wanted to come back?
It was just a really small one after Councillor Bill's question about technology. And I suppose I'm a runner, and Strava data is pretty useful. Do we understand because obviously we talk often about what's street lighting for? It's not really for me in a car because I've got lights on my vehicle. It's for those who are walking, the most vulnerable users of our network, and that's pedestrians, cyclists, etc. So do we have an appreciation of just how busy our pavements are, our cycleways are, and do we reflect for that in terms of how the lighting is provided? Because I suppose there is this, this argument, there's no point in lighting streets that have never got anybody walking on them, but actually those streets are a little bit busy. It would make more sense for those to be greatly lit. And I know the technology in terms of data could be available, and do we do any of that kind of work? Thank you.
So thank you for the question. We don't at the moment, but it doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't moving forward. That's one of the considerations that we've got around the town centres at the moment. Is very much around footfall and people's requirements in and around town centres at night. But yes, it should be something that we start being able to. To my knowledge, it hasn't readily been available to us, but we can certainly start asking some questions around it.
Les, finally.
Yeah, I was just wondering, it's a great question, Amanda, but this sort of pedestrianised cycling principle, we must either have data in for the LC whip, or we'll be gathering data to support the LC whip, which actually would answer Amanda's question, I think.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's certainly an emerging area. So I don't want to endorse specific brand names only, but obviously Google data and other things we are tapping into. And we're also introducing better monitoring equipment. So it does multimodal, so you can see those effectively sort of cameras in the LC whip areas. You'll have seen from the LC whip reports that we did that's quite expensive technology at the moment compared to the sort of counters and other monitoring information that we had, but it's definitely an ambition of ours to do that. And then the more consistently we are able to use that data across the county, the more we'll be able to interact with perhaps services and do those kind of things. I think the difficulty for me at the moment is what we probably have got would be just for being clear, LC WIP is the local cycling and walking infrastructure plans. We're all talking in acronyms, aren't we? So that is where we're looking at who is walking and cycling and what potential we could have to introduce it in key areas. The areas we're looking at the moment by nature are more sort of more of our urban areas more densely populated because there's more potential. So you're probably going to find a similar pattern amongst those areas. What we would probably need to do is kind of broaden that out and understand the comparison with areas where there may be, I guess what we'd be looking for is more surprising use, like you were saying, do we understand? At the moment we don't, but we are certainly able to access more and more of that data, and we are using it in other areas then to interact with sort of operational work that Pat's team does. At the moment, though, I say its use is limited in terms of this particular question because we wouldn't be able to be fully consistent, but it's certainly on the horizon, and we'll have a much better idea about people's journey patterns, the way they work, into work, other things. I think, when we did previous work on transport data, you'd think about a journey sort of, I go to work, I come back, but actually we know people care and responsibilities, shopping, all the other things we try and tie in. When you're running, are you running just running? Are you running to a journey destination, that type of thing? So we're getting better, but we're a long way off, I think, having it to the level that you might think we could have to influence that discussion.
Thank you. Thank you for your comments and questions. Thank you very much, Pat, and thanks for answering that, Jenna. Mr. O'Shea, anything further to add?
No, sorry. I'd just like to say, that 30% is a fair light, actually. I mean, I was a bit sceptical at the beginning, but I've been to look at and been out on the street to look at the 30% where we had a trial. And I think, to be honest with you, members just go out at 10 o'clock at night and just see what it is now. It still gives a good light, because LED can be, transformed to whatever percentage you want. It's totally different to sodium, and it gives a better light than sodium. So, I'm willing to go with the trial, and I think members will be quite surprised at what 30% does give. And we can always say, I mean, I served 43 years with the police. We can always say crime is a perception. It is. A lot of people perceive crime to be there when it's not. I was one of the people that argued against park-light nighting in 2010, only to be proved wrong because crime actually went down. So if we give it a try, we can always change afterwards, but let's give it a try and see where we go. Any areas that we do have now that as antisocial behaviour or as a high crime rate, say a series of burglaries, we work closely with the police, where we put the lights back on for a period of 3 months or so that they can do their inquiries. So we're always there and available and work with the enforcement agencies wherever we can do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea. We are asked to note the report and the committee's views on the proposals. We will take the report as noted and ask that the comments made by members today be reported to Cabinet. Agreed? Thank you. Item 10, our final item, is a presentation on the passenger transport update at pages 323 to 352 of your agenda. Jenna, I believe you're presenting this, so over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Slightly different format. We do come and do presentations every so often, but we thought, given there's quite a lot gone on in terms of passenger transport, I will use passenger transport. Some of you will be thinking, why doesn't she just say bus? It's because we are talking about perhaps different ways of providing public passenger transport. So we talk about demand responsive transport later on. So that is the reason. There's been quite a bit changing and going on in the last few months. So we thought it would be useful to try and take you through that with a view to making some changes to our policy and strategy at Cabinet, taking on board your feedback today. And we are working, I'll sort of talk you through it, but we are working to some quite tight timescales because we've been awarded some funding, which is sort of a requirement of which is to spend it next year. So again, just for people wondering, why are you doing it at that rate and in this way, that's just a bit of background, and I'll take you through that now. So I've just got to learn to look at my presentation and speak into the microphone. So if I forget to do that, let me know. So what we're going to cover off today, I'm going to provide a bit of an update on that funding situation I've spoken around in terms of public and passenger transport. Going to take you through the work that we've been doing to refresh the policy and strategy. That's hopefully going to help us then sort of comply with national policy guidance, and also to help actually direct this funding towards things that will make a difference to passenger transport in Leicestershire. There's a couple of other related bits of work, such as ZEBRA funding. So there's another acronym for us all to get our head around. So that's about zero emission buses. And then sort of take your views on that as the committee to inform a cabinet report that will be then reported to cabinet. So I should say as well that in order so that I don't keep you here for the next 12 hours, I haven't put all of the background to this subject in the presentation, and we have just tried to put some links in there that, you know, if you're thinking, well, where's this come from or what's the context of that, hopefully those links would be able to explain that for you. But in the interest of getting everyone home for their tea, we've not gone all the way back, and that information is there. So cutting to the funding update, and this, you know, I think it's fair to say is in contrast to a lot of the agenda items we bring to you. This is about additional funding coming into the council over and above what we had been expecting and planning for. So in June 2023, so feels a long time ago now, doesn't it, the summer, we were made aware that we've been awarded BSIP Plus funding. So BSIP, here we go again with an acronym, Bus Service Improvement Plan Plus funding. So the plus comes from the fact this is the second round. We were awarded 1.79 million for this financial year and 1.79 million for next financial year. And that was to support local bus services in Leicestershire. And there are terms and conditions associated with bus service funding. I've set those out on the slide for you, but they are largely around you can't spend it on other things. It has to be directly related to passenger transport, local bus transport and rural transport. You've got to maintain your existing levels of base budget on the area. So again, you'll probably be aware that we had a previous commitment to reduce our spend on public transport as part of our MTFS commitments. So that's the medium-term financial strategy. So the financial plan the council has, with the challenges that you've already spoke about in today's committee, like many other areas, there was an identification for savings there. If you don't spend the money, you may not qualify for future funding. Now that's the way that works, and the sort of official confirmation of that we're not too sure, but that is definitely a message from DFT that we've been getting. And there may be some flexibility, as in if you commit the funds next year, you may be able to carry on into the next year, but we're just still waiting to confirm the extent of that flexibility. And that is important. I'll come on to that in terms of the financial reasons later. So we've had a call from sort of fast forwarding now to end of October, beginning of November. We've had a call with the Department of Transport, and they were announcing that further money was going to be given towards passenger transport up and down the country. So there was 150 million nationally. It formed a package that was related to the cancellation of HS2. And of that 150 million, Leicestershire has been allocated an additional 4.05 million of revenue funding to spend in the financial year 24-25. With similar terms and conditions above. And again, I am going to talk about some of the risks of that money, and that may seem strange when you're talking about receiving a huge sum of money. It is positive news, and I think Lee Quincy, again, my colleague on the calls, head of service for this area as well. We are excited about the possibilities of it and want to talk those through with you today, but it is quite a difficult way to receive funding and a difficult way to spend it in a short period of time, and you'll see that come up through the presentation that I give today. So I think even better news is this idea of a further 850 million being allocated in future years. Now that won't all come to us, that does sound like a lot of money, doesn't it? But a proportionate share to Leicestershire if we can meet those terms and conditions. And that would be more of a multi-year settlement. So that would be allowing us to plan over a number of years, a mix of capital and revenue funding. And again, for anybody sort of listening into that, revenue funding is about simplistically is about the services and providing that sort of thing. Capital we can use for actual assets, so things physically on the ground, perhaps buses, perhaps improving the road network to get buses through quicker, that type of thing. So a mixed budget over a longer period of time, allowing us a profile, would be a really exciting prospect. And I think if we can do well with the money that we're going to talk about now, then we're in a better place to receive that funding going forward. So on to this funding profile then, you don't need to worry too much about the exact figures, but the shape is interesting. So if you are talking about services that you contract with other third parties, you want to be able to give them a good idea of your demand, and you want to be able to work on those services. And also, I think, I'm not a procurement expert, I should say this now, but the procurement team, would be really keen to advise us that the longer you can plan for and the more certainty you can give of those contracts, the better prices you're going to get. So essentially, and this is where I do sound a bit negative, that triangle isn't great for those objectives. You've got a big peak and then you've got a drop off. And the other thing it does is we've termed it a cliff edge of funding. If we were to sort of let a whole series of bus contracts based on the top of that peak, when it comes to the financial year next year, we haven't got the money to pay for it. And you'll see that and it is a complicated budget, so I haven't put the whole table into there because it's made up of things like concessionary travel, fares income, expenditure. So there's quite a build up to this picture. But essentially, you're looking at being able to spend somewhere around 7.7 million this financial year, going all the way up to 14 million the year after. And then, unless there's any other announcements or anything confirmed, you're coming all the way back down to 6 million the year after. So it's quite difficult to manage in the context of local bus contracts and passenger transport contracts, where ideally we'd be looking to contract services for 5 years. That's how you get good value, how you build up the patronage revenue, talk to the operators and improve services. So it's good news, but it's difficult, I think, is my takeaway message from that slide. And I think I know, apologies, a number of you on this committee will be familiar with some of the challenges we've had. We've talked about local buses before, and we will be talking to you about them again. But just in the context of nationally, it's been a difficult time for local bus markets in a number of areas. I should say not every service, there are some thriving services around Leicestershire, really well run commercial services, providing key links into the city, into key market towns and key services. But as a market as a whole, there are some challenges. We have been reduced patronage since the pandemic. There was reputational issues associated there. Driver shortages, you'll have seen that in things like HGV services as well, applies to bus operations. Cost of living wage rises, fuel costs, and the sort of short-term funding arrangements, both for us, but that's been the case for operators as well in terms of grants and things available from the government over time. It has been I'd sort of call it a patchwork of short-term funding. And again, it's very difficult to build a business model based on those. So, for a bit of emphasis then, we've called it this cliff edge. And I think it's fair to say, because of the sort of financial situation, our interaction with the market has kind of exacerbated those issues, if you like. So we've been letting contracts on a short-term basis. There have been commercial services withdrawn with no replacement or direct replacement services. And we're in a position of needing to review our current services because of those budget pressures going forward. So we've said that. So there has been about 3.68 million. It's about when you're to 2 decimal places, isn't it? Has been received, but it has come in a patchwork manner, and you weren't aware at the beginning of that process that was how much was going to be received. So just to paint that sort of difficult picture that we're working in to try and build back using the BSIP money. So, and again, just to put into context, so we've had 21% increase in local bus contracts with the county council since 2021. Just a bit of an indication again of the trouble that some of the market is experiencing. 54% increase in services supported by de minimis. So de minimis is where commercial operators seek support from the county council to keep that service operational. It's not ran wholly and then operate, in terms of a contract in the same way as other contracts with the council. There's been a 36% increase in spend on supported services in general. So you'll see there we've had 20% more contracts and 36% increase in services spend. So they're more expensive to run, basically. That would indicate. And there's 8 services been withdrawn completely, and the team is sort of busy with 593 registration changes to assess, analyse, notify, and react to if necessary over that time as well. So if we take on board all of that, then what does that leave us thinking about as officers responsible for the offer at the county council? So I think there is a recognition that the way that we have been implementing our policy and strategy before has been driven by those financial constraints and risks that we've talked about, but it has, I think, been sort of diverting from national policy with the BSIP coming forward. And so there is a concern nationally about the shrinkage of the local bus network, and they want to prevent that, and that's why this funding is coming out. We've got a number of contracts that we need to review, so we need to be clear about the terms and conditions, if you like, that we're doing that on. What are we trying to get out when we go out through the process? And so I think it's still really relevant that we review our policy and strategy to take on board this. We were going to do it anyway, but I think it's even more important now, and it's got that particular slant on it in terms of providing the option to do more than we were doing before. And I'm just going to emphasise as well here at this meeting that the policy and strategy review, and we'll come on to it, is going to provide us the option to do more. How far we take up that option is going to be dependent on how we can manage that financial cliff edge that we've spoken about. And that will be something that we need to discuss in more detail with our finance colleagues on the back of that funding award. So I just want to be really clear about that. And it's really important as well that the policy and strategy allows us to take up other opportunities such as the zebra funding. So having given you all that, you're probably thinking, well, so what have you been doing? So we'll get onto that bit now. So there's just a slide there that kind of sets out the context and history of the PTPS. So just in case I haven't said it explicitly, the PTPS is the Passenger Transport Policy and Strategy document. That's what guides our kind of processes and work when changes in the market happen, or we need to review our contracts for local buses or demand responsive transport. And you'll see that I won't go through it all, Chair, but there's been quite a lot going on. So just when you think you're going to make progress on the, or sort of get to an agreed position, something changes, and that's essentially what that slide shows. So the policy we've got at the moment is available online, but just in summary, the kind of purpose of it and the focus of it is to encourage passenger transport usage, to get people on there, to as far as possible to leave that to the commercial market. You know, that is their job, that it's less risky for us, better for them, and where services are operating commercially, they're more sustainable. So the focus of the policy was around supporting that. But there, where that wasn't appropriate, to encourage and support community transport as well, to kind of work where in the absence of commercial services. We wanted to make sure that new development considered passenger transport connectivity, and then to intervene as a council where that priority travel needs couldn't be met by those other opportunities going forward. It also contains our responsibility to provide concessionary travel reimbursements and work with operators, and also to make sure that we provide clear, up-to-date information. So even if we don't do anything about the changes, you know, those registration changes that I mentioned would be significant work for us. So the strategy, so again, just in case the policy is just kind of setting the high level ambition, the strategy is more about how we go about doing it. And the strategy's priorities that we had before were clearly around the key needs of elderly, disabled and isolated people as a priority. We had a priority for employment deprived areas, and we focused on access to local centre, so where you could perhaps get your food shopping, primary healthcare, education and employment opportunities. But I think it was fair to say, because employment, the way employment opportunities works, it's not about people going to work, it was about, is there somewhere that they can work? And actually in reality that was set below sort of food and healthcare as the way we operate in the policy. And we've also focused on core and peak time, so we don't subsidise evening services, Sunday services, that type of thing. So, and just to sort of summarise then what the assessment that a service would go through, either when we decide that we want to review, change a contract, consider whether we should continue a contract, or whether a service is deregistered commercially, we look at certain criteria to do that. So there's the net subsidy cost per passenger kilometre. And if you're just thinking, well, why on earth didn't they do net subsidy per passenger, because that would be easier and less complicated? We did think about that at the beginning, but if you put it in the context of the number of kilometres the passengers travelling, it is more representative of rural services. So it's an important measure that we look at that. We score that out of 0 to 20. We have the number of residents who wouldn't have access to another service. We score that out of 10. And then we also scored journey purpose based on survey information and the sort of critical services we mentioned earlier, food shopping, primary healthcare, that type of thing. We score that and we add the total up. And if the score is 25 or more, that's a strong case for us to intervene with financial support and so on, marginal and weak down the scale. So that's what we were doing before. So I've talked a lot about kind of some of the things that have changed, and in summary, we need to refresh the policy and strategy because things have changed at a national level, which we need to reflect in there. We need to be flexible in terms of funding. We need to be able to spend money, and we need to be able to decide what we would do if we had less money. And also we need to consider different ways to provide passenger transport to people across different sort of settlement types, rural locations, more urban locations. So we want to sort of achieve that reflection of national change. We want to provide more direct support for borderline or potentially commercial services. We want to be able to use relatively small amounts of subsidy for those services that are well used, support jobs and economic growth, and provide viable alternatives to the car journey. We've talked in the previous item about the environment imperative as well. That would play a part in here. Keep the network, keep an identifiable network essentially that's providing journey choice, but it has to still be value for money and appropriate for Leicestershire given the financial context that we've got. If we can do that, we'll have a more stable and stable commercial network in Leicestershire, and we'll probably be able to achieve a blended approach to service provision. So basically the appropriate type of service for the appropriate demand. Just carrying on. So in terms of then how we'll do it, in the policy, if I'm honest, it's a fairly straightforward refresh update. So change the names of the documents, keep them up to date, use more modern terminology. A lot of it is around that. We've changed the council's strategic plan. We'd reflect that. We'd include the national guidance on bus service improvement plans, and we would also, since we did the last policy and strategy, there's been the development and implementation of the enhanced partnership where we work with our partners, including commercial bus operators, and that again would be reflected. But I would largely say that there's nothing controversial in my view or anything that would substantially change what the meaning of the policy was before, because those aims and ambitions are largely right. What has been the focus is how we go about that, and particularly if we're being sort of open and transparent where we have got restricted funding, how we make choices to spend it. So in the strategy then, we're going to focus more on connectivity and access to services rather than the nearest local centres. So what I mean by that is if we previously were assessing a service, and I'll just take an example, don't read anything into the example, but if it was going from Melton to the city, we would look at the usage and think, well, people in Melton have got access to services in Melton and the people in Leicester have got access to service in Leicester. So the fact that it ran between the two didn't give it too much of a score, and also the number of people doing that, travelling end to end, didn't necessarily feature as high in the scoring. Clearly what the bus service improvement plan is trying to do is recognise usage and reward that a little bit more. So we want to look at that in terms of the opportunities the bus provides rather than it just being the local centre where we can. And I'm going to caveat all of this is with, just imagine I'm saying where affordable on the end of anything that I'm saying here. And we want to give more weight to employment and training. And again, that would do that because if you're if you're accessing the city, there are by nature more employment opportunities than there would be in a village along the route. So it's just to reflect those things. We want to include and explain the bus service improvement plans and national bus strategies I've been talking about. And we want to sort of re-look at and re-emphasise how the development industry can work with us to provide and contribute to that network of passenger transport services. Right, so into a bit of the nitty-gritty then. So in the strategy, we want to include, at the moment, what we've got is bus services, and we've got lifeline demand responsive transport. So, and I've got a slide just for reference around what demand responsive transport is, but lifeline demand responsive transport is largely around 1 or 2 journeys a week to your nearest local centre, so perhaps not where the choice of shops is, but where you can get milk, that sort of thing. And that is it, largely. We've been experimenting, we've got a trial with the Fox Connect, some of you will be familiar with that, where there's more flexible demand responsive services. So we want to reflect that now in the strategy as an option for delivery. building on that experience. Again, I've got available, but providing there's available budget, but that, you know, providing the service is underpinned by evidence where that's a more appropriate service for the area, and that we can make ticketing and marketing sort of links. So, you know, if you don't really want to use demand responsive service to connect to a bus, if you've got to buy 2 expensive tickets to do that. So it's got to be practical and work. And again, this would give us the opportunity to do that. We'd like to reflect that sort of blended approach in there in the strategy. And we've got some studies going on as well, and as with consultants, and also looking at best practice from around the country, as well as the Fox Connect trial. So as we've got a better understanding of how to evaluate those type of services as well, we'll weave that into the service. So I've just I won't read through that, but just in the pack, there's a bit of an explanation of those types of demand responsive transport and community transport, just so people can understand the range that we're talking about there. Okay, so just another way in which we'll reflect that change and provide the opportunity to have a more flexible approach in the strategy. I think what we're doing at the moment is we're assessing commercial or, you know, borderline commercial services in the same way as very rural, very heavily subsidised services. And those, we don't necessarily have all the data from commercial services at the point that we do that. So what we'd like to do is simplify the process. If somebody's deregistering a commercial service as an operator, we'd like to work with them to understand the value for money of that service, really based on the cost per passenger kilometre that we talked about for initial period, and then work with them to see if they can improve that back to commerciality. You'll see again that we've removed some services recently because they didn't meet that essential needs part. They're providing additional journeys, but there was in fact quite a number of people using those services. So if we can, we'd like to retain those as bus operations, and then work with the operator, review the data, have a conditional way of working with them to do that. And partly we want to do through the enhanced partnership, work with operators to understand what that could be. So we would look to do that if there is budget, as always. I think I've probably put that on every slide. If we have evidence of viability issues, because there are subsidy controls that we need to be mindful of, that it is good value for money, still needs to be good value for money in terms of that cost per passenger kilometre. If the operators will work with us towards returning the service to commerciality, and we agree to those, you know, to provide funding based on those targets and a shared information, even if we have to keep that confidential, and that should, you know, that we don't see that improvement in the service after that period, I would imagine that 12 months would be a fairly decent starting point, that it would then go through the full assessment that we've talked about before, and become part of the council's services, and which we would then shrink or grow depending on our financial position. So just in order to as well reflect, first of all, a bit more of an efficient process, but also some of those things we're talking about in terms of valuing the opportunities a journey can provide rather than just looking at what people are doing now. We wanted to change that criteria we spoke about. So if you remember those 3, the last one was journey purpose. So in order to establish that, you actually had to go out and do a manual survey of the bus users on the bus. You know, I think it is sort of, it's going to be difficult to always make sure you've got a representative day, that you've understood that you've got, you know, the right people on there doing the things that they normally do, and it's a very manual task. So we're looking to replace that from journey purpose to opportunity. So what on this route could you do? Can you get to employment? Can you get to more than one shopping centre? Can you get to more than one education opportunity, and rate the services in that way? So it provides greater weight to connectivity to do that. It simplifies the assessment and process and the data requirements, and I think it's going to be great, you know, more consistent. We're going to be able to apply that more consistently going forward. So in terms of that, then we'd like to incorporate those changes into the document, you know, take on board your comments today, and put that before Cabinet in December, so that we can start to make use of the money in an agreed way that we're comfortable with. I should say as well that we have consulted our legal team on those changes, and I think I'm slightly oversimplifying, but I think because we're broadening out what we're doing rather than shrinking it down, they're comfortable for us to manage those refresh in this way. That's not to say that in a couple of years, if we did get a multi-year settlement, if we had a more certain position, that we might need to refresh it more widely and go out to consultation again. I think that's important. So the timetable is there. So I'm sorry, because that's not quite the end of the presentation, but it is the end of the part around the policy and strategy. So I just wanted to stop there and particularly take your feedback there so we could be clear about it, given that that's really where we want that input for Cabinet particularly.
Thank you, Jenna, for that excellent presentation. It's nice to sit here for a change, and we've got some good news coming, so thank you. Comments from colleagues? Any comments? I'll take Les first.
I've just got one curious question in the back of my head. So if I've got this right, the 4 point whatever million can be used for capital and resources.
Sorry, that was me. The first lot is just for revenue. They're hoping that the future multi-year settlement will include capital. Apologies, I probably wasn't very clear about that.
Right, sorry. So if that comes through, bearing in mind that our bus operators are commercial private enterprises, and you've talked about buying zebras potentially, how does that kind of manifest itself if we're the local authority and we're the recipient of that money for capital, but it's the bus operator that potentially, I'm just curious.
I think the answer is inevitably going to involve with a lot of forms, legal and procurement checking. But there are ways and means of doing that in terms of demonstrating that the subsidy is of public benefit and it is needed, couldn't be met by the operators themselves. I think that's a really important test. And actually, the government is leading a second round of zebra funding, so zero emission buses, and we would take the learning from that, because if that sort of that framework is legally compliant. Compliant with procurement rules, and we've got a way of doing that. But I think it is really important that this money isn't just about handing it out to commercial operations and replace money that's already there. We've got to get additionality out of this money, and that test would be part of it. But there are ways and means of doing that, and terms and conditions that would go with the funding. They're not easy to do, and it will take a bit of time. But yeah, you can do it.
Mr. Allen.
Thank you very much, Chair. So in my division, we had 2 services that went, which when you looked at the figures was quite understandable. So since COVID, the usage on one dropped by over 60%, and on the other one, it was almost an 80% drop in patronage. Is there any kind of indication in the broader sort of bus usage, which I think has dropped, pretty much universally, that either there's an anticipation that will reverse, or it has already reversed, or is it looking like a continued decline? Thank you, Jen.
I think it's a bit of a mixed picture. So as I said, there are some services that have, I don't like to use the phrase bounce back in the same way, but have recovered in way. And I think they tend to be services well established, perhaps have large student sort of movements that are quite consistent, as well as that. I think we are up around 80% recovery, but we're low on concessionary travel recovery. And again, that affects certain areas more than it does others. So I think it would be fair to say that it would be unfair to say that all services are in a position of not recovering and not improving. But equally, you couldn't say, yes, they'll all be fine and everything's coming back now. It really is dependent on who was using it before. Have there been other ways and means to attract new users? It's a bit like trains as well. If you think that, perhaps the pattern prior to COVID would have been 5-day season ticket travel. If we've been able to be more flexible, that's helped. So it is a mixed picture. There are some positive indications of recovery, but in certain areas that, and particularly where there was a high proportion of concessionary travel users, that you've not seen the same increase. But we're going to come on to trying to get more people to use the bus to help with that recovery as well, in terms of some of the things we could do.
So thank you. We also had locally a service where there was an introduction of schools where previously there'd been a county council school bus service. And there does seem to be a bit of an issue with parents and or the students maybe adopting the headspace from it being a school service where you can turn up and there's a 20-minute window, for example, where the bus is there available for you to get on. you're kind of realising it's a public service and you've got maybe 30 seconds where it's going to be at the stop to get on before it moves on again. So I don't know if that's a challenge which might be addressable or moving forward. Thank you.
Just very quickly, Chair, I think it's an interesting one because when budgets are tight, I think we've all also reduced things like information, marketing, that kind of thing. And I think if we are serious about sort of integrating different types of routes together to make a value service, we're going to have to do some of that information and work with people as well. So I think that's an interesting experience you've seen and that we can take on board, and if we were to do something similar again, because I think it would be helpful, to provide, to make use of commercial services for school transport. It helps all of us, but it has to be a practical solution, doesn't it? So I think that's useful feedback for us.
Thank you, Gemma. This is Zach.
Thank you, Chair. I really welcome that we've got the opportunity to do this. I'm actually really disappointed we didn't start this in February, because I think there was a decision to continue with the old one, or should we do a new one? And I'm disappointed we didn't look to do that in February. But we are where we are, and that's not the officers, not the officers' fault. You're doing the best with what the information that we've got. I think the frustration we all have as councillors, and I say we as a collective, is that what's also changed is we've had loads of service amendments. When I started, I've been a county councillor for about 6 years, and when I first started, you actually could engage with your bus and they would be happy to talk to you. My most recent passenger removal, which was of the 104, said, no, we're not going to Meridian Business Park anymore, we're not going to Thorpe Astley. I knew the reason why. It wasn't necessarily because of passengers, because of parking on the Meridian became so problematic, the buses couldn't get through and it was delaying service. But they wouldn't talk to me about an alternative route, and I find that really frustrating. And when I spoke to officers here, officers hadn't appreciated that it also picked up GP practice. So that actually had removed service to an NHS service, which had caused a few problems locally. So I think one of the things that I would like to see is actually proper engagement with the bus companies when they're looking to alter services. And how can we do that? You're going to stop a service, but you need to talk to us properly about it. You can't just go, right, we've had enough. But we're not going to tell you how many passengers are ever used there. We're not going to, and I think the engagement has been really poor. So I was wondering what mechanism we could have within the strategy to actually feel like this is a partnership rather than a commercial and a public, because it's a public service and the subsidy provides that public service element, but the bus companies have to make a profit, and I have no problem with that. But there doesn't seem to be any flex or compromise. The other question I've sort of had is, one of the things that's been quite nice, and I'm in an area that's busy and I don't have the challenges that some of the rural services get. My services are too busy and I get lots of complaints of standing room only, and that is quite unusual, I think. And we are having real capacity issues, real reliability problems, buses not turning up. The services that people are using are getting busier and busier. I think that's because there are lots of school children that are using public buses. I think also the service into the city tend to be busier. I wouldn't want us to lose the opportunity to look at those services that are busier and looking at increasing capacity for those services. And last point on DRT. It's a brilliant opportunity, but if you don't have a smartphone, it's pointless. We have to think about availability and how people can actually access it. It's frustrating that we've got Fox Connect that goes Narberth train station, and I've got Vector that's in Thorpe Astley, Broughton Town, and goes into the city. Never the twain shall meet in the middle. There's no connection between the two services, and you need two different apps to function. It's really unhelpful. And actually, if you wanted to get from Narberth train station to the Meridian Business Park, you can't. And that's a train station to a really big commercial, lots of businesses based at the Meridian Business Park, but you can't travel by train and public transport easily. And that's frustrating. And I think we can't miss out town to town, we have to look at other transport hubs, which would be the park and rides, the train stations, etc. So sorry, there's gazillions there, but I'm so excited that we actually can get
Well,
changed.
if you can try and answer that, Jenna, that'd be great.
I'm going to have to leave the meeting. That was the hospital I rang. I need to go back to hospital.
Okay.
I had some problems with
All right, Keith. Hope everything goes well.
I drove to the hospital this morning. I drove back. I've got an infection in my finger, and they've taken some blood samples and they just go back in.
Okay. Good luck, Keith. Gemma, if you can.
Yeah, sorry, Chair. So I'm just taking on board the things around working with the operators more in the partnership. I think certainly, and Lee's on the call, I saw him scribbling down the points you made about the connectivity as well. I think he's also excited. I think, if I'm being really honest, I think this injection of money and the structure around it is a catalyst for that re-engagement. I think it's been really difficult for bus operators to work with us because we've had very little to give. They've been working in very different situations. I think in terms of where they're potentially making changes and they would like to keep going and want some subsidy around that, there's an obvious incentive to work with us on those. The ones where it's more about things around actually operationally it doesn't work, but we want to know we're missing connections, I think that's more of a challenge. But actually, I think Lee and the team have been working hard on the partnership. I think in terms of introducing the strategy as well, we're going to meet with operators to make sure that what we're proposing is workable from their side. They can give us that information, it's available. So I would really hope to see an improvement in that. And I think, again, that would be similar from a community point of view as well. Because like I say, there are some really good operations out there. There are people wanting to grow their businesses and services for our mutual benefit, and it would be a shame to miss out on that. So I do think that does provide it. And I think, if I'm honest, serious money does provide a better catalyst for that. So I think that we can work on that. In terms of working on their busy services and connections, that is definitely part of Lee's thinking. He's been sort of talking to me about the opportunity to make the most of a core commercial offer and link into it, and absolutely take the point about 2 different apps and different things. And that is certainly on our list to do. And again, I think where there's potential for us to either provide sort of the basis of a way forward that we've paid for, jointly to look at, or we can provide some things around tickets and marketing through the partnership. Again, hopefully that'll be a catalyst to link some of those things up. And now that we've got a couple of those types of services running, there's obviously things we'll have learned from that, so we can look at that next time as well. And I think I've missed out something that you asked, but I can't remember. Sorry, the train station connection. Yeah, so I think we will certainly look at that as a particular item, but I think as a principle, where we are looking at being more flexible and doing more than the bare minimum, those are the kind of hubs you'd absolutely work on. And hubs and interactions is one of the studies that we're doing through the BSIP, which if the chair allows me, I have got a quick slide on when we come back to it.
Thank you, Jenna. Mr. Bill.
There's a heck of a lot there. I think it would be very useful if this report could go out to all, not just all to county members, but to district members and parish council members as well, because we're all interested in this subject. And I think the more people who know about the work that Jan and the team have been doing on this, the better. That is a really comprehensive report. Just picking up Richard's point about the 2 services, that's been a very controversial issue in our patch. Is it services 1 and 2? Well, we keep on and on about it. So if you could do anything there, I think it would.
Through the chair, Mr. Allen, please. Mr. Allen.
Yeah. I did fall out a little bit with Amanda and yourself just then, because to me they will always be railway stations, and I do correct. I'm sorry, I'm a bit old-fashioned, but I do prefer railway stations and not to call them anything else. But anyway, But I was just wondering, is there any? It's just a thought. Now I didn't raise this morning because it's only since occurred to me. But now that the booking officers are going to be retained, could there be some working with the train operators who presumably still run the booking officers or will be running the booking officers, and the bus operators to work together so that we start to move towards what some of us have always hoped would be a integrated public transport service.
I'm not sure whether Jenna's got another slide later on, but if you can answer that, Jenna.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it would form part of the work we're doing to look at the possibility of hubs and interchanges, really, and where we can do that. Obviously, we have limited influence ourselves, and I think you've probably all experienced, if you've worked with Network Rail changes or anything in your areas, it's very difficult to influence the timetable and link-ups. But certainly in terms of practical stuff with the operator, it would be in scope of that. I can't tell you exactly how much potential there is in reality to do it, but it's one of the things we're looking at.
Yeah, I mean, the ideal would be that if you're catching a train from, I don't know, St Pancras to Hinckley, but change at Nuneaton, change at Leicester or at Euston, and you'd get when you get off the train, there would be a bus to take you much closer to where you actually live. It could be Earl Shilton, Stony Stanton, Sackett.
Whitty, David.
So well, I'm talking about Hinckley. I mean, you know what I mean. Well,
yeah, that's for the operator. That's for the operators to
Colville,
coordinate, and everything gets county to do that.
The ideal would be if people did not have to take their car to do a short journey, or a long journey, if they could go by train, get off the train onto a bus, off the bus onto a taxi, and door-to-door service. Bit like, you know,
yeah, sure.
you get this on the continent. There's nobody, you know, people do not drive around. There's public transport to take them. It's integrated. It works like clockwork.
I know we've been fortunate to receive some extra funding, David, but I don't think it's that much. So perhaps
Would it be that?
Oh,
much? No.
Well, that's for the operators, though, isn't it? I take your point.
But
in an ideal world, that'd be perfect.
But is it not conceivable that we could actually bring about the buses actually coming to the railway station, and thereby, you know, avoiding long delays, long waits, and people thinking it's wet, it's horrible, I'm going by car. That would be the ideal. We used to have that, and this could be a move back towards a more sort of civilized way of
Take your point, David, but I don't know whether Jenna can answer that or whether it's a commercial exercise to do that.
To be fair, Chair, I think you've answered it. We can look at the potential for it. We can encourage the conversation through the partnership, but it will be largely a commercial decision. Sure. But I think sort of picking up both of your points, that having better conversations around that hopefully is part of the work we want to do.
So David's quite right. You know, there should be a conversation, but it is ultimately a commercial decision. So thank you for your questions and comments. Mr. O'Shea, would you like to come in now or wait to the end of the presentation?
I'll wait till the end if that's okay.
Okay. Jenna, could you continue? Oh, sorry. Mr. Fillmore.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the challenges, and it's been sort of mentioned too, I remember when we first started with DRT, and the principle was about hub and spoke. I mean, unfortunately, we've got 2 spokes and no real hub. So it must be an absolute nightmare for Lee to try and sort of coordinate. But I was just having a thought, Jana, and I don't know whether it's possible, but with this funding, so we know we've got some bus services that are thriving and prospering. We know we've got some bus services that have not recovered and are potentially likely never to recover. But the cost difference between pushing a double-decker bus or a 53-seater coach around versus a 13-seater DRT, is there an opportunity to work with those operators and look at the kind of the overall funding mechanism of costs per passenger, as in effectively what may be one option is that some of those double-decker and 52-seater or whatever they are coaches are displaced because they're not really viable running half a dozen people around, but actually a 13-seater DRT would be viable. So I'm just curious, is it a bit of mix and match? I mean, for me personally, I think DRT is an inevitability of the future. And I just wonder if there's an opportunity to work with those operators. Say, well, actually, look, if you know, we're subsidising this, and actually if we take that out and you do that and we push the DRT in, is there an opportunity? Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, so essentially, I think that is exactly the opportunity. I think I want to be really clear that it wouldn't be the council's role to kind of detract from commercial services that are there. So, but yeah, so ideally you'd have more direct commercial links on kind of corridors, that type of thing, and we would feed in a better value, because as you were saying, the difference potentially between a sort of bus subsidising a whole bus service and using the demand responsive is you can provide much better coverage for the same money. So you would link in, I think, would be that, and you'd have that kind of mix and match. I think, Lee, you've been terming it a blended approach, haven't you? That's how you've been selling it to me. So yeah, essentially that, and you're basically talking about having appropriate service. So if you've got a kind number of people who want to travel along corridor, that is clearly an appropriate commercial bus. It may be appropriate for it to have a subsidised by us as a bus, because that subsidy is relatively low. But around the more rural areas, particularly where you're sort of trying to link into centres, then you want to move to more demand responsive. But I think, picking up the previous conversation, you don't want that to be a disjointed operation. You want that to look like a local network. And that, I think, again, subject to kind of it being for 1 year, but the level of funding certainly lends the opportunity to consider that in some areas, and absolutely almost, support and maximise the opportunity of the commercial services.
Thanks, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. Do you want to continue with the presentation, Jenna?
Yeah, apologies for the time, Chair, but I'll try and be quick through the next bit. So just wanted to kind of provide that context really in terms of the bus service improvement plan money, the type of things that we're already doing. And we've touched on this. You've asked me a couple of good questions about it. So there's a number of people we'd have to involve in terms of determining what we can do with the programme in general, make sure that it's that we're compliant to other regulations. But we had already started some work through the partnership about where, if you had money, if we got more money, what would we do with it? As we've had some money come in, those things have been sort of accelerated to help us make those decisions. So one of the key things that I think a number of you have had comments to me in the past around sort of engaging with younger people and getting them to use bus services. I think there's a real opportunity to do something around an initiative on that, perhaps subsidised fares for younger people. You'd be surprised about how controversial the definition of what a younger person is can be. So that'll be one thing for us to work out. But certainly doing quite a large initiative, trial-based across Leicestershire, does that make a difference? Can we encourage a new generation of bus users? That would be something that we could do. We've talked about the demand responsive potential already. I won't dwell on that. Pinch points and that type of thing. The Meridian scheme would be an example. If we had money to implement something to manage parking, perhaps, would that help? Would that retain services? Would they be more efficient? We can look at study areas for that. The cleaner, greener element. So, what would electrifying the network look like? I'm not an expert in this technology either, and I do really probably need to grow my knowledge as it comes in. But electricity might not be the only option for larger vehicles as well. So there's an agenda there to keep in touch with. And then that potential for behaviour change. Some of the other things that you've spoken to us about in the past, new developments, marketing, ticketing. Are there things we can do that we've perhaps not been doing? Without this level of funding that would encourage bus travel. And we've got, but we want to use an evidence-based approach. So we would be using the evidence that we've been working with on the operators to make decisions that the board as a whole, the partnership as a whole is happy to do. Just in that vein then, just a bit of an update as well on zero emission bus regional areas, to give their full name. That's how you get ZEBRA. I'm sure sometimes people start with the acronym and then put their words around it. So we are working on that. So there was 129 million available for authorities and operators to introduce that. We told DFT would be very interested in doing that. We've commissioned a consultancy, ITP, to support officers in this. It's not something we've done in Leicestershire before, so we're aware that there is knowledge, that we need support with. We've worked through the enhanced partnerships with the operators to understand what their kind of capacity is and who's interested in doing that. At this stage, and it sounds slightly cryptic, I'm not being deliberately cryptic, it's just where we are. There are 3 operators that have expressed an interest, provided the information. We're working through that with them. We've actually this week updated that information, and we'll be using that to put proposals through to the DFT, who will assess the bids. But I think that's a clear sign of that partnership work in action. We know we can't do it on our own. We're going to have to do it with operators, and we're working in that way. We'll have to submit a bid by the 15th of December. And I'm sure, it's good that we're busy. Lee and I don't want to be bored, but coupled with trying to make a plan for the spend for next year and the bid deadline's a really busy time for this area, and also one where we've got vacancies and things in the service. So it is a challenge, and I think it's just worth noting that risk around actually getting the work done and doing it on time. But these are, we're in an area where we've actually got those opportunities, and we absolutely want to make the most of them. And the team are really pleased to be involved in those. So we're likely to hear then the outcome of that submission in March next year. And then you'll be pleased to know that is the actual end of my presentation, Chair.
Right. It's very, very, very good presentation. Thank you, Jenna. I'm just going to ask colleagues if there's any final comments based on those last 4 slides only. If it's 4 slides, Amanda, yes, and it's brief, please.
Thank you, Chair. The city have been doing zero emission bus transport for a little while, so the Orbital and the Park and Rides, and I know we're in partnership with them for the Park and Rides. What are we doing together? Because I think there are lots of service where the city is the final destination and it spokes out beyond into the county. So I'd be really interested to know, in terms of particularly on the net zero, is what partnerships have we got in place with our city partners?
Yeah, sorry, I didn't turn my microphone off. Just to say, actually, again, I probably should have made more of that. Sorry. Yeah, so it's quite exciting, really. Officers at the city have already got experience of that. They've been very keen to work with us. I think, again, there's that mutual benefit because the services go county city. So I can't, I'd sort of like to talk about more at some point about what those proposals are, but they do involve working with the city. The city also attend our enhanced partnership board, so they're part of that. And I think anything, giving money to Leicestershire for zero emission buses is an administrative thing, isn't it? In practice, it's where people want to go that we need to focus on. So yeah, quite excited about that because they've got knowledge and experience to pass on to us as well. So we are tapping into that. And I think just looking at Lee, I think we'll be able to give a bit more detail on that bid sort of in the lead up to that December deadline, which is frightening not very far away now.
Yeah. Jan, I was going to come in there. I think, one of the proposals that we are keen on going with will link in with a lot of the work that has already been done in the city on the Zebra network, and we can work with city colleagues that have gone through that process, as you've said, Jana, and that will really help in terms of our bid before December.
Jana, Amanda?
Just coming back, I know that obviously with the orbital buses and the Park and Ride, there is a charging station. Is there capacity for that expansion?
So again, I'm just going to, a long list of things I'm not an expert in, I've given you today, isn't there? But the work that we've done suggests that there is, but that we are aware in Leicestershire there are pockets where charging infrastructure for various electric vehicles isn't working as we want it to. So it will be part of the risk assessment. But yeah, and we will check that out. But that has been part of the initial ask that we've put out to operators to demonstrate that.
Thank you. Mr. Allen, briefly.
Thank you. Yeah, just a very quick point. So you've mentioned electric trucks, an alternative which I think we've just had a quick dabble with in Hinckley and Bosworth is hydrogenated vegetable oil. We've just bought on our first refuse vehicle with that. I think potentially for big vehicles that might be better than electric. Thank you, Chair.
Is that a comment or a question? All right, thank you. All right, all through. Mr. O'Shea, your turn. Thank you for being patient.
You are most welcome. It's a shame that we've got to spend it in such a quick manner, really, in my eyes, that the government have given us this money. But what I will say, though, the officers have been dedicated in the way that they've worked together. They've got a very short deadline to get to. And as you can see from the slides, they've got a lot in hand. And I think it's quite exciting of what we can achieve. But I would have liked a longer period for us to spend the money in to work with. But as we are where we are, I'm very grateful to receive the money for the council and for our department to have it. So I'd just like to say thank you to Lee and Jana, and certainly the team below them that have been working so hard to actually push this forward in such a very, very short window of opportunity. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Shea, and I'm sure we all share your thanks to the team, Jenna and the team, for the excellent work they're doing so far, and wish you well in the future and with other bids and making it all work and whatever. So, but thank you. So we're all through on that item. So could I ask that members note the presentation, and we ask that the comments made today be duly reported to the Cabinet for its consideration. So thank you. That concludes that item. The next item is date of the next meeting. That is on the 18th of January 24 at 2 p.m. And I will give my apologies now because I shall be away. Any other items which the Chairman has decided to take as urgent? There's no urgent items, so I'm going to bring the meeting to a close. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you, Jenna and Pat, for excellent presentations, and I wish you a good evening. Thank you. Oh, and before I go, Merry Christmas. Oh, well, tomorrow.